Okay. All right, because I think we are live and we have several folks that have joined us, and we're absolutely delighted and would like to thank everyone for joining us for this great session, Navigating Difficulties and Partnerships with Low-Income Housing Tax Credits in Year 15, a case study. Before I introduce our panelists and participants this afternoon, I first would like to go through a couple of housekeeping items. Everyone should know that this session is recorded. Everyone is muted, but you have the ability, once you enter the workshop, to unmute yourself. We would suggest that you keep yourself muted during presentations when other people are talking, and only unmute yourself in order to have good sound quality and reduce feedback when you're ready to speak. The use of the camera is up to you, but of course we would love to see everyone, and so we encourage you to use the camera. Chat is enabled, so you can send chats to the group or individuals. We also would like, if you would like to exit full screen so you can always see the chat, please feel free to do that. Be sure to have a pen and piece of paper to keep notes or write down any questions you may have. And please put your questions in the chat box once you have them, and then we will select a few at the end of the session for the various speakers to answer it. Briefly, I would just like to give a description of what this conversation will be about before I recognize our distinguished panelists. The Opa-Locka Community Development Corporation recently won a landmark decision in order to fight the preservation of affordably, locally owned housing for not-for-profits participating in low-income housing tax credit, program. The decision challenges a new breed of economic investors. We refer to them, or I refer to them, as aggregators, who have been purchasing limited partners' interests with a goal of cashing out at year 15. We are very excited that you're here to hear our panel discuss the issues regarding low-income housing tax credits, year 15 strategies, as well as this particular case that we have before us. And with that, I'd just like to briefly once again say that I'm Willie Logan, the moderator, the CEO of Opa-Locka Community Development Corporation. On the panel, three very close colleagues and dear friends, one being Shahrzad, who is a distinguished attorney at legal services, probably can go in the private sector and make millions of dollars, but we're so delighted that she is working with community-based organizations, ensuring that we have all the tools, resources, and knowledge we have to protect the interests of those that we serve. And Shah, welcome and thank you for being here. Also, we have with us Davenport, also an esteemed attorney who has been litigating cases and issues regarding low-income housing tax credits for the past several years, representing both for-profit and not-for-profit developers who are dealing with issues as it relates to year 15 and their rights. David was the attorney for Opa-Locka CDC, along with Lita Rodriguez, who led the fight in us being successful in our interest in preserving the rights of local neighborhood organizations that are developers. And then finally, let me, last but not least, recognize Iris Clark, who's also a dear friend who's been working in the CDC and the community-based organization and community development industry for decades. She's vice president of Seacoast Bank, who has been a wonderful supporter of the Florida CDC Association. We appreciate that. She's been engaged and active as a board member and as a leader in her banking industry and working with community-based organizations, particularly as it relates to community development and low-income housing. So welcome all the panelists. And with that, I really would like to begin the slideshow. And I think just to summarize in about 30 seconds, in order to bring the context for developers, we're going to talk about the case of Opa-Locka Community Development Corporation and its partner Holokeen and their desire to exit the relationship after year 15 and the consequences of that and how that affected both Opa-Locka CDC as well as the industry in moving forward with these types of partnerships. And so I think we can move on to slide 2, and I would like to recognize Iris to present her slides at this time.
Thank you, Willie. I'm excited about the opportunity to just talk about it from a banking standpoint, and definitely want to recognize the work that Opa-Locka CDC does in terms of addressing the impact of affordable housing across low to moderate income communities. Just to go into a specific definition, the primary focus of the LIHTC is to create affordability subsidies for that affordable multifamily rental. And we're looking at making sure that we keep that into those that are 60% or less of the area median income. And the partnerships are structured with the state housing finance, our entities within each state, and it's set in place so that there's a criteria that is outlined in the qualified allocation plan or similar documents. Policies and priorities are structured in that format, and they have a direct, significant impact on the type of projects and the locations of the affordable housing projects that are structured and developed within the LIHTCs that are set up for the nonprofit partners. When we're talking about how we sort of look at this, and when I say as a banker, part of what we're doing is we're creating some of that capital investment, and we're making sure that, we say, hey, what is critically important to creating a core investment as we address our assessment areas and address the credit needs within those assessment areas. Part of the importance of that is affordable housing. So everybody sort of looks at that and says, hey, the affordable housing impact is critical. So the equity posture that we come to the table with provides approximately 70 to 90% of the development costs, thereby reducing the debt service and lowering the rents for those individuals that we've already discussed. The credits are dollars at a permanent reduction in tax liability, carried back over 1 year and for a 20-year period. Investors are entitled to depreciation and other deductions that further reduce the taxable income when we're looking at those housing tax credits. The issue that I normally look at is talking through the impacts. What are the eligibility? What are the compliance? And of course, when you're dealing with a banking partner infusing capital, they're going to be assessing key risks before they come to the table and say, how can we really make this an affordable transaction? Even though it's going to impact our performance with regards to regulations, if we're not looking at where the potential foreclosures, what are the risks, then we're not going to come to the table and infuse our capital. The other area that sort of looks at is like, hey, what is really going on right now in the state of the LIHTC market? And I know we've had some prior individuals that have been involved in nonprofit partners, and they've sort of said, hey, you looked at 2008, you looked at the financial meltdown, you looked at some of the prior impact areas. Now we're sort of back to the ready position or posture of LIHTCs and how does it really impact the community. And when I say CRA, I'm talking about the Community Reinvestment Act from the standpoint of the bank regulation, not from the community reinvestment of a community. So when we're talking about how do we get to that place of looking at what is driven by the bank regulatory requirement, because that is fitting us from a core investment impact, then you're seeing the largest 7 banks by deposits are set up so that they're investing across their markets. And some of them are, the known partners, Wells, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Citi, US Bank, Capital One, but all banks of all sizes are looking to get into that market because it sort of hits them in 2 different pockets, potentially one for lending and definitely one for investments. Also, you're seeing an opportunity for some of the non-bank, Northwestern Mutual, Allstate, USAA, you're seeing that kind of opportunity that creates that Goldman Sachs. How can this market really create an opportunity that looks at that $10 billion to $13 billion annual investment opportunity? So definitely it's opportunity for all of us to come to the table. The key consideration, I would say specifically from a CRA standpoint, is strictly that when we're looking at how do we address affordable housing, what is critical for the bank and looking at ways to drill into the footprint of, are we really making sure that we address those credit needs? This LIHTC project is probably the most important opportunity that we have available to us. Normally what we're finding is that we're sort of solicited by a community of syndicators, and they sort of knock at our door, and we look at our footprint, we look at a key assessment area, we sort of look at our deposit size, and we say, you know, what opportunities do we have? Where are our gaps? What are our opportunities? Have we met those goals? And if we don't create a partnership in terms of that LIHTC opportunity, it stays in a frame that says, hey, you're not really meeting those opportunities and goals that your regulators have set in place for you as a lender. So therefore, when we get down to that investment performance, we make sure that we look at it from the standpoint of how is the risk actually leveraged? Can we really afford it? And then what is our return? In most cases, we get an outstanding return and we're at a very low risk. Even if there's a potential for foreclosure, in most cases that doesn't come into effect. So we're creating a total streamlined opportunity that says, here's a way for you to infuse capital, bring it to the table, create an opportunity for you to get a good return while you are addressing your CRA considerations from a regulatory standpoint, all at the same time. Once we're sort of in that performance compact or situation, we sort of let the project roll in its entirety, and it is on our books for the entirety of the 15 years where we're getting the opportunity and getting credit. And I think that's sort of where we roll over to back to Willie and say, hey, what are the challenges that you're seeing when you're sort of terming out that project?
Okay. Thank you very much, Iris. That was very informative, and I would have a couple questions myself. It's always very important to understand what the bank's criteria and strategies are, and we really appreciate that insight. But we're now going to pass it off to David, who's going to talk a little bit about the historical understanding and expectations of Year 15 rights, as well as Section 42. David?
Thank you, Dr. Logan. Iris, I appreciate all that. That was very informative and helpful. And, you know, as Iris mentioned, this is a public-private kind of partnership where, you know, Congress created the low-income housing tax credit to incentivize private investment in a public good, which is affordable housing. We continue to have a huge shortage of it. And so the program is vitally important to our communities. The historical understandings and practices of the program have been quite good. It's the #1 driving production of affordable housing. There's also the preservation component of it. And that's where we come in at Year 15. And we think about historically, the practices have been quite good. If we could think about how when you need to preserve the asset, what do you do? So you have a variety of different rights that are built into the partnership agreements at the very beginning. If you've negotiated well, if you've thought ahead, if you've been concerned about preservation and what's going to happen after the end of the compliance period. The compliance period, as you know, is a very critical piece, a very critical date within the life of the partnership. And so at that particular point, the investment in the low-income housing tax credit that produced the equity for the construction and development of the project has essentially run its course, and the investor has received their expected benefit, which was the allocation of the credits in exchange for the equity contribution. Of course, they also get an allocation of the losses. So what do you do as you think about those Year 15 rights? There are rights of first refusal, which is largely the discussion of today and was the case that we had with Dr. Logan down in Miami. And that's Section 42I7 of the code. It's a very unique congressionally created right, only available to nonprofits and other qualifying organizations like tenant groups. Other things that you can negotiate for, can we go back to the slide here? Sorry, I hadn't quite gotten there. Purchase options, which include an option to buy the limited partner's interest at the fair market value, an option to buy the project at the fair market value. Two very different things, and it's very critical to have both in your deals. Puts, calls, an opportunity to say, you know what, at the end of Year 15, I'd like to put my interest to you, or I'd like to call those interests due. It's a means by which to allow the investor to exit in a predetermined type process. Or you can continue to operate as is and hold together in a partnership That's typically not going to be preferred by an investor because they're going to want to exit at the end of year 15 since their investment's pretty much run its course. And then, of course, we want to re-syndicate the project. We want to, allow for capital improvements. We want to adjust physical needs and things that arise. And so we might go in for a re-syndication for an allocation of new credits. Sale of the project, typically not ideal, might be something some people want to do, but for preservation-minded folks like OLCDC, myself, Shar, and the rest of the panel, sale of the project is typically not something that we're really interested in. Qualified contract, it's a pretty complicated process. We won't spend much time talking about it, but if you have issues coming up with a qualified contract, you certainly want to consult counsel. And then there's a forced sale requirement. A lot of investors will require a forced sale component so that they have a means by which to cause a discussion at year 15 to figure out how they're going to exit. Kira, thank you. If you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. So that unique statutory right that I mentioned is created in Section 42I7. It's only available to nonprofit participants and other qualifying organizations. It was added to Section 42 in 1990 because Congress recognized a need to incentivize participation in long-term preservation of community-minded, mission-based organizations like OLCDC, because it's an amazing tool that you can offer to community-based organizations to provide affordable housing that can come with services, that can come with locally owned control and empowerment of local communities to be invested in their communities, creating jobs in their communities, doing the things that Dr. Logan and OLCDC are doing with their boots on the ground like other mission-based organizations. And all it really does, it says, look, no federal income tax benefit, i.e. a tax credit, will fail simply because you have this purchase of a right of first refusal at the end of the compliance period for a specified minimum purchase price. And it's important to understand what that specified minimum purchase price is. Most people hear what a right of first refusal. Oh, I know. If somebody shows up and says, I want to buy your car for $5,000, you may have an agreement with your cousin that says, well, look, if somebody offers to buy, you can buy the same price. That's not what this is. This is a minimum purchase price. So if there's a decision to sell, if there's an intent to sell, Congress says the right of first refusal, if given to the nonprofit, can allow the nonprofit to assume the debt on the project that exists at that time and pay for the exit taxes of the investor. So in Dr. Logan's instance, what you're going to hear about in more detail, that's about $100,000 on that community-based development, Aswan Village, after a 15-year compliance period. And so if you think about the opportunity that creates for the community to be able to exit the investor for a statutorily minimum purchase price, which is not that much, you have an enormous amount of resources to pour back into your community, to empower your community and to empower those who are providing the services for that community. So if we could go to the next slide. So this is essentially where I think we have the partnership debt, exit taxes, which I just discussed. There's this concept of phantom income from a negative capital account. And state and local taxes get attributable to the sale. Essentially, what you're going to want to do here is hire somebody smarter than me who's got a tax background, who can essentially be, an accountant to help you calculate that price. And then if the taxes don't exist, then you just assume the debt, and it's essentially a $1 transaction, which in Dr. Logan's case was how the aggregator came in and evaluated the circumstances because they called it a $1 ROFR. So I think if we could go to the next slide, this may be where we start talking about kind of the circumstances specific to Aswan Village Apartments, which was the OLCDC development. And what's happened in our industry, and this is the real troubling thing that's happened at year 15, is you've had an emergence of what have become known as aggregators. They were not the original participants in the deal. They are not the original investor. They're a private equity minded interest that came in and saw an opportunity in our industry. And they said, you know what? I will go to a collection of different funds, a collection of different investment vehicles, and I'll buy my way in. And I'll buy my way in and I'll become Willie's partner. I'll become the partner of the original general partner or the original sponsor of the deal. And I'll just sit and wait. And when we get to year 15, my entire mission is largely to monetize and figure out a way to extract value out of the equity that has built up in the program. So they are large, well-heeled, very financially savvy investors who have come in and aggregated a collection of limited partner interests in affordable housing projects all over the country. There's a handful of them from a different variety of different parts of the country, and they are now managing, and in some interests owning, the limited partner interests in thousands and thousands of low-income housing tax credit properties, waiting for year 15, waiting for an opportunity to deploy their resources, and in my humble opinion, reach an outcome that was totally not intended at the beginning of the deal, and extracting equity out of communities that were funded with a tax credit. It's a business model. It's a way of going about things that I believe is totally contrary to the program, totally contrary to the intent of the original parties. And what it's produced is dozens and dozens of lawsuits in which I've been involved with for, I don't even know how many clients, in over 40 lawsuits now in about 25 states over the last 4 to 5 years. And, you know, it's wreaking havoc for folks like OLCDC, who are simply trying to do what the program intended, provide services, provide community empowerment, and provide an opportunity to help figure out a way to improve the socioeconomic status of those in need in our communities from affordable housing and other excuse me, I got something in my throat. I get a little passionate about this stuff, but as Dr. Logan knows, you get the opportunity at the end of year 15, if you get to the intended outcome, to be able to reinvest that and build additional affordable housing, provide additional benefits to your communities and to your residents. So at that point, I think, are we at slide 12?
Yep, you're gonna pass on. You're gonna pass it back to me.
You got it. I passed it.
Thank you, David. Let me just add a couple of things as it relates to Aswan Village in this specific case before I recognize Shah to talk about implications, strategy locally and nationally, and then David may want to also weigh in on that. Specifically as it relates to Aswan, we, our original limited partner, as well as our general partner, was Bank of America and Bank of America CDC. Harlequin came in after year 10, purchased Bank of America's limited partner interest as well as general partner interest for less than $400,000, an asset that was worth 20-some odd million dollars. And so you can see why we would be, well, why would the bank sell you an interest for 500,000 that's worth 20-some odd million, unless they understood that that interest really was not worth the 20-some odd million. And so in this case, Harlequin reached out, solicited buyers to purchase their interest as well as Opa-Locka CDC's interest. They went through a vetting process, made a decision, and then communicated to us what that decision was, and then asked us to sign on a dotted line to approve it, which is when we signed it and then enacted our ROFR. And so with that, let me just yield to Shar, who was very much involved in the development of the agreement between Opa-Locka CDC and Harlequin, as well as help counsel us throughout this entire ordeal. Shar?
Thanks, Dr. Logan. Thanks, David. Thanks, Iris. So as Dr. Logan said, my name is Shahrzad Emami. I'm an attorney with Legal Services of Greater Miami. I direct the Affordable Housing Project there, and I'm also the director of a statewide community development program where attorneys from across the state that work at legal aid and legal service organizations provide legal assistance to only nonprofit organizations, and particularly nonprofit affordable housing developers. So I have had the privilege and the opportunity of representing organizations like Dr. Logan's OLCDC for the last 13 years. So my only clients are nonprofits and nonprofit affordable housing developers. So if we could go to the next slide. I think there were some slides before we talk about this. There we go. So let's stop right there, and I'll talk about Aswan Village for a little bit more. Dr. Logan keyed that up for me. So basically, like he said, what happened is Harlequin came in and they purchased the GP's interest and the investor limited partners interest. And in the process of that purchase, they wanted to amend and renegotiate some terms of the original deal that was present. And part of the original deal between Opa-Locka and Bank of America was that Opa-Locka CDC had what we call a 42 I-7 right of first refusal, which meant that if there was an opportunity where the property was going to be sold, that the property would have to be offered first to OLCDC for the minimum statutory purchase price of what we call debt plus exit taxes. So that was triggered, and OLCDC, of course, tried to exercise on that right. And Hal Keene at the time said, no, you can't do it because of X, Y, and Z. But the right of first refusal was in the original agreements before Hal Keene came into the picture. So what they tried to do is they tried to negotiate that right of first refusal out of the agreements. And I was representing OLCDC at the time. And I said, well, you have this right of first refusal that's already in there. And as a matter of fact, in negotiating the restructuring of the partnership, we first negotiated a letter of intent that laid out all of the basic deal points of how Hal Keene was going to come in, how much they were going to pay the GP and investor interest to come into the deal, what they would pay Opa-Locka CDC, what the differences in percentage of ownership interests would be, and then, of course, what OLCDC's rights and responsibilities would be moving forward after they entered the deal. And one of the points that we put and we negotiated in the letter of intent was that Opa-Locka would maintain their original right of first refusal. And it was further negotiated, and there were some other points that were added. But in essence, the original right of first refusal was kept, and it was put in the amended partnership documents when Hal Keene came in. So then at that point in time, when very recently, when Hal Keene went to then sell the project, that of course triggered OLCDC's right that we had negotiated and put into the deal and made sure that it maintained in the deal. And then, Hal Keene came. He did not have that right. And maybe David, I don't know, David, if you want to talk about those things that Hal Keene brought up, why they thought that OLCDC did not have that right. And then I can talk about the beginning part of these deals, which is that every nonprofit needs to have a qualified attorney and even a tax credit consultant helping them in the very beginning before you sign anything with any for-profit or nonprofit development partner, where you negotiate these up front. So
why don't you go to David and see if he wants to add anything before you continue?
Yeah.
David?
Yeah, I mean, I think just from a very case-specific fundamental deal, I mean, they underestimated OLCDC. I think they felt like they could essentially come in and say, hey, we got a great deal for you. Let us tell you what we think is good for you. And that's kind of how they pitched it. Obviously, Dr. Logan will want to weigh in on that. He may have a different opinion, but from my perspective, kind of watching how the whole thing developed, there was a level of arrogance to the whole thing. And it was, we'll just let the nonprofit, they'll see a little bit of money, we'll dangle it out there, and then we'll just go ahead and do this deal with this New York-based private equity, but no, they were dealing with a sophisticated organization that, was well represented by Shar, well represented by the executive team there, and counsel that they were working with at the time. And we had a team, and we just said, we have rights. And what they're trying to do is violating those rights every step of the way. So from my perspective, that was the fundamental cause of all of this. And then they essentially got together with a law firm and, tried to steamroll OLCDC. And, we just kind of buckled up and said, let's get ready because we know we're right. And we made it through to the end and we got summary judgment. They filed a motion for reconsideration. And I think one of the most rewarding things for me thus far in my career was when 20 national organizations came in and wrote Dr. Logan a letter of support. The folks on the other side at Hawking and their law firm came in and asked for reconsideration and said, this is bad for the LIHTC program. It's going to chill investment in affordable housing. I mean, they said a lot of remarkably, I'll stop, but they said a lot of things in it that would just kind of shock the conscience. But when they tried to convince the court that the decision, which was based on the facts and the law in front of the court, would somehow chill investment in affordable housing, was ludicrous. And so these 20 organizations from all over the country weighed in with a letter of support and said, absolutely not. It's the right decision. It's well-founded in law, well-founded in fact, and it will do nothing but help further investment in affordable housing. So from my perspective, it was simply two things. It was one, they thought they could just come in and take advantage of a set of circumstances. And two, I think they just felt like they could steamroll us.
Thank you, David. Shar? Yeah.
So, and the two things that were brought up was the fact that, they kept saying, well, you didn't trigger the right of first refusal because you didn't get an offer. Well, clearly there was an offer. It was actually signed, it was actually a signed offer to purchase the property. And they came in and said, well, it wasn't a purchase and sale contract. So therefore it was not an offer. So they tried to do that. The other thing that they tried to do when we renegotiated the partnership documents, when they came into the deal, one of the things that was changed from the original right of first refusal is that if OLCDC went out and procured an offer to sell the project, then that would not trigger the right of first refusal. The 42I7 right of first refusal, that would trigger Opa-Locka being able to buy the property, but for fair market value. So then they tried to tag onto that and say, oh, well, we didn't procure this offer, Opa-Locka procured this offer, which of course that argument failed as well because it just wasn't true. But those were sort of the things that came up in this litigation that they tried to throw out there to circumvent OLCDC's right of first refusal, which was very clean and very in plain view in the documents. So some of the things that I tell my clients to consider when negotiating these rights, first of all, you want to do it upfront, meaning at the very beginning of even starting your negotiations with your for-profit or nonprofit development partner on a LIHTC deal. So before you sign anything, before you submit any applications for tax credits, any kind of MOUs are executed, you want to sit down as a nonprofit with your development partner and say, look, having this 42I7 right of first refusal is very important to our long-term stability as a nonprofit organization and for the community. And we are not going to do this deal unless we have this right in these agreements. Now you have to have negotiating power. The 42I7 is not a given. It's not something that you automatically get as a nonprofit organization. You actually have to ask for it. And negotiating session. I mean, it's not something that they're just going to give to you. So I always tell my clients, and I'm actually giving a session at 3 o'clock today in the conference that talks about negotiating tactics on these LIHTC deals. And we're going to cover this in more detail. But what are you bringing to the table? What does your partner need from you as a partner? And do you have that leverage to negotiate for this right of first refusal? Make sure that they don't sort of circumvent you and say, well, we'll consider giving you this right, but we don't know if we're going to be able to, or how that right is going to look in practice until we bring the investor partner in. Well, the response to that is, these are the parameters of the right of first refusal. This is what we want. And if you can't get an investor to agree to it, then we can't be a part of this deal. And a lot of joint venture development partners will balk at that. And they will say, no, we want the ability to choose the investor. And if the investor doesn't like the 42I7 right of first refusal, but they give us good pricing on the credits for the deal, we want to be able to go with them anyway. But for you as a nonprofit, you have to remember that this right of first refusal, this is like gold for you guys. This is what is going to maintain the long-term affordability of not only the projects, but the long-term economic viability and sustainability of your organization. So you as the nonprofit need to have a level of approval over the investor that gets brought into the deal. And that investor needs to know, and that's why we put the language in a negotiated letter of intent or MOU that is binding on the partnership. If you get the award of tax credits, that this right of first refusal has to be put into the partnership documents. And if you can get your investor early on to understand that and to agree to that, then you won't have such an uphill battle as you approach closing. There are other kind of transfer approvals, as David said, that you want to try and negotiate for. The 42I-7 refusal, it doesn't happen until end of the compliance period. But what if they want to sell the project at the end of the credit period, which is 10 years, which they can do? You don't want their sale of the property to circumvent or do a runaround and get rid of your right of first refusal. So what do? You put approval rights in so that you as the nonprofit have to approve any sale or transfer of the property or partnership interests prior to year 15 so that they can't get rid of your right of first refusal. That's an extremely important point to consider. Make sure that that right of first refusal is clean. Try not to get the investor partner or the general partner to put in all kinds of qualifying language. You know, sometimes the right of first refusal that is the statutory right that is written is very clean. You know, there's not a lot of bells and whistles to it. So if they start putting in language like, well, it has to be a bona fide third party offer that is signed, and it has to be a purchase and sale agreement, or it has to be this and it has to be that, and you know, try and stay away from all of that qualifying language. And then once you negotiate the right and you're happy with it and it's included in your partnership documents, you need to be an active participant in these deals and monitor the financials until that right is exercised upon. Why do you need to do that? Well, you want to make sure that if you exercise that right, that you are going to be paying debt plus exit taxes. And as David said, the exit taxes could potentially be high. And you want to monitor the project throughout the life of the project so that you make sure that those exit taxes are in your budget, right? It is something that is doable for your organization. Only the exit tax definition or rule is that only when an investor's entity capital count is negative, which occurs when their cumulative tax losses exceed the investor's invested capital, is when you have high exit taxes. So you want to make sure that the property is kept in balance throughout the term of the credit period and the compliance period so that you as the nonprofit are able to actually purchase the property for debt plus these exit taxes. So it's important to monitor the life of the project. The statutory purchase price, just to know this, it is a minimum price. It doesn't include accrued but unpaid amounts due to limited partners, such as fees or loans. And it is very common for them to add that and say, look, you're going to have to pay us debt plus exit taxes plus these fees or outstanding loans. So that's the other reason why you want to keep track of the financials of the project throughout the term of the project. We already said it's not automatic. It has to be included in the partnership documents. Make sure that you understand these deals and how tax credit deals work and how money is paid out. We talk about waterfall proceeds in a partnership. You want to make sure that you understand how proceeds are paid out and when you get your share of certain proceeds. And remember that the right of first refusal, sometimes they'll limit you and they'll say it has to be used in year 15. Well, that's not true. It can be used in year 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So when I say make the right of first refusal clean, I mean, don't limit yourself. You know, the right of first refusal should be something that's kept open. It's an open option for the nonprofit to exercise anytime, you know, that from the start of the compliance period. So basically, those are just some considerations to think about when you're entering these transactions. And it's very important, you know, Opa-Locka did a lot of things right in this instance. They had, you know, qualified counsel representing them. They had, even at the time, a tax credit consultant that they were working with. And so it's extremely important as an organization that you're aware of all of these potential issues and that you plan accordingly for them. Because even when you do that, even when you do all of that, you can still have a situation like they were in, where an aggregator came in and clearly they had this right, and then we renegotiated it and we put it back in, and the language was good and it was very clear, and then they still said, oh, we don't want to do that. So you still can have issues when everything is perfect, right? Or almost perfect. So I guess that's sort of the conclusion to my piece.
Okay. All right. So I think we're at the almost at the end of. Thank you, Shah. I think we're almost at the end of the presentations by the presenters. We have one more slide, and I'm going to recognize David to talk about that. But let me just once again acknowledge the good work that Shah did, and I think what's even more telling about this circumstance, regardless of how prepared we were, regardless of how airtight the agreement that she negotiated for us, we still had to spend just under $1 million in order to protect our rights. And so I think what she said in terms of being prepared and knowing with all the things in place, you still may have to fight for your rights is very important. Let me also urge folks who have questions to go ahead and submit the questions. I think we only have 2 now. David's going to be short, and then we're going to move to recognize questions. David's going to talk a little bit about call to action, and close us out with the presenters, and then we're going to recognize the questions from the audience. David?
All right, thanks, Dr. Logan. So just real quick, we'll talk about state, locally, and national strategy locally and nationally. There's a lot going on. I'm very blessed to work with the National Housing Trust and the Preservation Work Group that they have. We on a quarterly basis that we get together and we talk about issues from, you know, this to all sorts of issues. They lead a very active legislative effort up on Capitol Hill with many supporting groups, including people who helped write the initial LIHTC, you know, legislation back in the late 80s. There are ongoing efforts to try to amend the ROFR to make it more clear. You know, essentially, because you have this debt plus taxes kind of safe harbor, there's no real qualifiers on it. And all we know from legislative history and congressional intent is they just wanted an opportunity to make an ease of transfer for nonprofit continued ownership and preservation at year 15. So if the owner decides to sell, it triggers, and here we go, let's do it. But the problem is we have market forces now that are trying to frustrate that. So you've got to galvanize support. Start with your state and local housing authorities. Washington State Housing, WSFC, Washington State Housing Finance Commission, published a wonderful report last fall, largely because Senator Maria Cantwell is a huge advocate for low-income housing tax credits. And, you know, they identified this problem. They wrote about it. It's a nice white paper. Reach out. I'll get it to you if you want to learn more, if you want to figure out how to help. Another great resource, you know, hats off to this young man. His name is Brandon Duong from Shelter Force. He put out a very in-depth, remarkably detailed identification of the aggregator issue, the issue specific to the nonprofits. It came out this morning. That young man is going to go places. He really dug in and figured this problem out and wrote this in such a way that people are going to really easily be able to understand it, and hopefully they'll have a call to action. On a national level, NCSHA, National Council of State Housing Authorities, they're all over it. You know, work through associations, groups that you may be a part of. You know, our sponsoring organization today, talk about it, reach out to people, share your stories. If you've been, you know, affected by an aggregator, talk to people. Willie's looking at me, I can see I might have
Yes, I am, because we have questions and we have 10 minutes left, and I really do want the audience to have an opportunity to get their questions in, and some of them are very good, if not all of them. So let me go to the first one. Tom Larson, he asked the question, Harlequin came in for $400,000 or less. How did the money work out for OLCDC in the end? I guess I probably should answer that, huh?
Yeah.
A couple of things. One is the property is appraised at about $29 million. There was about $7 million debt that a bank had a first mortgage, and an OLCDC had two loans on the property. So there was about $13–14 million of equity in the property. Opa-Locka CDC has been enabled to purchase Harlequin's interest for about $91,000. And so you do the math, we got 12 million plus of cash that's leftover value of the property. We have to assume the mortgage, refinance the debt, and then we make some improvements, but a year later we re-syndicated, redo bonds. And so when it's all said and done, Opa-Locka CDC not only owns an asset that's currently worth about 30 million, after it's renovated and re-syndicated, probably worth about 35–40 million, most of which is equity in the property. And so, you know, we have a lot of cash to invest in other property. We have a lot of cash to support the issues and the things that we do that don't generate income. But more importantly, I think, is that we really have put ourselves as an organization in position to really be self-sufficient and to determine, you know, what areas we want to work in, what deals we want to deal, and have the leverage to negotiate both with investors as well as with general partners. And I'm not even sure we need general partners anymore to negotiate our terms that work for the organization. So it worked financially very well for Opa-Locka CDC. We think it works as a precedent for the industry overall, and so it was a huge winner. The next question, Peter McDougall, dear friend. Days, we're waiting for the judge to tell us. 60 days is important to us because if we get it before December 31st, we save $500,000 on property taxes for the next year. So you can begin to understand how this works very well financially for the not-for-profit if they could take control of the property. The next question by Jackie Eddy. And
I can take that one. Willie,
yeah.
I think it's from a banking standpoint, definitely banks are specifically interested in participating and retaining the sustainability for affordable housing impact. Consistently, we're measured and monitored by our regulator. In most cases, from a CRA standpoint, in terms of the Community Reinvestment Act, it's an opportunity for us to continue the impact of affordable housing in the low to moderate income communities.
Okay. Let me just recognize Brandon, who I didn't realize was here at the conference. He just sent the link to the article that was published today in Shelter Force. As most of you all know, Shelter Force is the lead of housing, affordable housing, a national magazine, at least in my opinion, in the country. And they cover issues all throughout the nation as it relates to affordable housing. And we believe that this article goes a long way in really giving insight to how you protect how not-for-profits protect their interests, but what they may be up against. And so, Brandon, we thank you for joining us and thank you for sharing the article. Are there any additional questions before I turn it back over to the panelists for any closing remarks? If not, I'll conclude, but Shahrzad, let me just start with you and I'll just move down to Iris and David. Do you have any concluding remarks you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I think the only thing that I'd like to say is if there are any nonprofit organizations that are on this webinar call, please join me at 3 o'clock for negotiating tactics for low-income housing tax credit transactions. I'll be going through not just negotiating rights of first refusal, but other things that you as a nonprofit need to negotiate upfront with your development partners. So hopefully you guys can, some of you can join
Thank
me.
you. We encourage you not only to log in to Charles' presentation, which will be at 3 o'clock, but to the entire conference, as well as to take advantage of the fact that we are linked to other conferences throughout the nation as relates to state and national organizations that support and work with community-based organizations. So we want to encourage you to take advantage of these wonderful workshops. Iris, any departing?
I just want to say thank you, everyone, for the excellent opportunity to participate as a banking partner. The other thing that definitely, for those of us that are in the banking community, oftentimes we serve on boards for nonprofit organizations. So having this body of work really carry forward, because sometimes our technical expertise sort of stops at the financing capital infusion piece, but this gives an opportunity for us to really understand and share that personal expertise and broaden that community so that we can really create greater value for the nonprofit investors or our partners.
Thank you, Iris. Your email may be filled up at the end of this. Hell, I may be emailing you. David, please give any concluding remarks.
Well, I just want to thank my panelists and Dr. Logan, my dear friend, and everybody who took the time on a Friday afternoon to participate and really echo one of Shah's themes about keeping it clean. The ROFR doesn't really have any statutory restraints in terms of a bona fide offer, in terms of needing to have a third party. And so one of the things that I've done in my practice is shifted a little bit and spending time with clients on the front end of new transactions to help them, let's be clear the other way. Let's say that, it's the end of the compliance period and I have the opportunity to have my ROFR for debt plus taxes as Shah outlined, and we're going to agree up front. I can self-trigger. I can just, do something to cause that to happen. I can have an affiliate of mine make an offer and that triggers it. Or we can say, I don't need a bona fide offer from a third party. You can do things up front now to make it real clear as to what the triggering mechanism is. I fear that it's going to continue to be very difficult on a congressional level. I've got a call today at 4 o'clock with a group trying to do that in the bill that's going to be pushed up. But I fear what's going to happen is what happened last year. The aggregators sent like 4 to 6 lobbying firms to try to kill it. And it worked. Right. And so, let's figure out a way if we can not only push on a congressional level, but when we're negotiating the deals, let's just make it clean up front. If they're going to give you a ROFR, why should they not be willing to make it easy for you unless they have some other intention?
And they won't. They won't, let me tell you, because as much as you try and keep it clean, the problem is the investors council and oftentimes your co-GP's council will be like, no, we're putting all these qualifiers in there. I mean, I've had arguments with large national law firms that only represent investors that have told me, you're wrong. You have to have a bona fide offer. It has to be from a third party. We're putting this in there. There's no negotiation. And that's why now what I have started doing recently is saying, look, we want to know what this ROFR is going to look like, what the exact language is going to look like up front. When you want to bring an investor in, I want to know what they're going to be okay with, because I'm not going to go through 12 to 18 months till we close on financing and then get to the week before closing and have them say, no, we're not putting that in there. We're not putting that in there. And that's what they do.
Yeah, I think one of the things we just got a question from Jackie on that, Jackie Eddy. And I think one of the, how do we do this? One of the ways to do it is right up front in the letter of intent. You want me to participate and get 10% credits for the set aside? This is my expectation. This is my requirement, right? I mean, do it at the earliest opportunity.
Right. And make sure that there's no language in there that says only if the investors consent, because that's what they'll do. So then you have to say, well, let us be a part of picking the investor. Who are you looking at? Who are you looking at as an investor? Tell them this is the language we want. And if they have a problem with it, then we're not going to do the deal. And it goes back to, what does the nonprofit bring to the table? If you have enough leverage, then you're going to be able to do that.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I really think the panelists have been great. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. We really appreciate you all taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us. Let's also recognize our fearless leader, Terry, the Executive Director of the Florida CDC Association, who not thought it robbery to allow this panel to present, and we appreciate that, Terry. And for all those who joined us once again, thank you. All of this will be posted on the Florida CDC Association's website. The recording of it also will be made available. And so once again, thank you all very much for participating. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Yes.
everyone.
Soon.
Bye.